Hey everyone, Mr. Sujano here. In this video, we're taking a look at the Brook Vivid controller. Let's get started. Alright, to kick things off, Brook provided the Vivid wireless controller for a fair and honest review, and that's exactly what we're going to do here. The Vivid is compatible with the Switch, Android, iOS, and PC. The Vivid comes packed with a bunch of different features. It's got a 6-axis gyroscope, turbo functionality, you can program macros, it can wake up a Switch, which is actually a pretty big thing. It's got vibration, a really interesting first-person shooter functionality, and the battery on this is reported to last 10 to 12 hours. Opening up the box, and the first thing we see is the Brook Vivid controller, and I'll set that aside to see what's under it. Surprisingly, it also comes with a phone clip, and normally with other controllers, this is a separate add-on that you would have to buy. It's nice for Brook to include it. And it also includes a USB-C cable. Now, taking a better look at this phone clip, and it appears to be just a standard phone clip. There is no manual lock on this if you wanted to lock it at a specific angle. And on top of that, the part that holds your phone in is just a standard spring. Both the top and the bottom of the phone holder portion have this rubbery material on them to help prevent your phone from slipping out. And here's the Brook Vivid controller in all of its glory. Now, to be honest with you, when I first laid eyes on this, it reminded me more of a toy than an actual controller. Although I guess you can argue a controller is a toy in the first place. But to me, this looks like it was modeled after a cartoon controller as opposed to something in real life. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Cutesy comes to mind. One thing I do like about the design is that the home button, the macro buttons, the turbo buttons are all right there dead center to use. They're not out of the way, it's not awkward to use them, they're very conveniently located. Now, taking a look at the back of the controller, we've got two buttons on the very back here, as well as a switch between macro and shoot, and we'll go over that in just a minute, and also a tiny reset button. And moving to the top of the controller, we've got our USB-C charging port, L and R buttons, ZL and ZR triggers. Now, my first impressions with these triggers are not very good, and we'll go over those in just a second. Now, to elaborate on that just a little bit, there's a very interesting travel path for these buttons. About halfway down, there's an interesting click. There's a bit of resistance. And in terms of overall comfort, initially I found this controller not to be that comfortable. I don't know if it's my hands. Maybe they're too big for the controller. I'm not quite sure there, but I just couldn't get a grip that was actually comfortable. We'll check this out on Android first. Attaching the phone clip on this was simple and straightforward, and the phone clip is cleverly designed not to block any button on the controller. And very fortunately, the phone clip was able to easily accommodate my Red Magic 6R. I ended up having to offset my 6R just a little bit because you can see the phone clip is clamping down on that phone power button. Admittedly, I ran into a bit of an issue trying to pair this controller to my phone. I turned it on in what I thought was Bluetooth mode, and my phone wasn't recognizing it properly. There is no included instruction manual, so I had to go online to see what the issue was. So it turns out I had to place the controller in Android mode by holding the home button and B button down for a few seconds until the controller started blinking. And from there, the controller was recognized as Gamepad on my device. Once all that was said and done, I booted up my Gamepad tester, and you can see here the latency isn't too bad at all. I'm actually impressed by this. And the joysticks seem pretty sensitive. I mean, there is a little bit of latency here, but that seems to be pretty standard with most Bluetooth controllers on Android. I'm not going to give this a free pass, but I will say it is better than some of the other controllers I've tested recently. But getting back to these trigger buttons, and unfortunately they have a very fatal flaw. Well, if you're trying to use them for racing games or anything that requires throttle or some sort of sensitivity. The analog triggers on this one are not very good. About 50% of the travel distance is complete dead zone. And if for some weird reason you don't believe me, here's a better look to show you exactly what I'm talking about. As you can see, I'm pulling down the trigger about 50% of the way, and the input isn't registering at all. But as soon as you pull it down past the 50% marker, the input starts to register. This is not good at all for an analog trigger, and to make matters even worse, this problem was persistent on both sides, so I don't want to say it's defective, it just seems like possibly a design flaw. Now, testing out the phone holder, and unfortunately things aren't looking any better whatsoever. The phone holder is struggling to support my phone. It does kind of lock into one position, but it's super floppy and my phone can easily pop out of this. If you're using this in a somewhat bumpy environment, well, your phone is probably going to be flopping all over the place, and it might not be an enjoyable experience. Now let's move on here and test out this controller in game. One thing I noticed almost immediately was that if you flick the controller, it it would register an input in the opposite direction when it sprung back into place. This might be because the springs are possibly a little bit too loose. I'm not quite sure on this one. It wasn't consistent, but it did happen. However, registering motions in this and the joystick was responsive and everything seemed correct. However, the D-pad is a completely different story altogether, and kind of an interesting one. It wasn't registering my inputs here, quarter circle forward, quarter circle backwards, or even the motion for Dragon Punch. Absolutely nothing was coming out. Now let's move away from Android and test the Vivid out on the Switch. Pairing it to my Switch went really smoothly. I just held the button on the top of this and it automatically paired with my Switch. It was very quick. Amazingly here, waking up the Switch from a sleep state with the controller was a great success. You cannot say this about a lot of third-party controllers, and I'm really glad to see it here. However, just like on Android, the D-pad is not registering my movements. Quarter circle forward and quarter circle backwards are not working here either. When I turned on the input display, I noticed that the D-pad was not registering diagonal movements, so going from down to forward, it was completely skipping down forward, and going from down to back, it was skipping down back. Now, getting away from fighting games and checking out a different game altogether like Breath of the Wild, and I'm noticing the controller is performing a heck of a lot better. Not perfect, but a lot better. In fact, I was pleasantly surprised with the gyroscope on this one. It was very sensitive, it seemed to be very accurate, and I would argue that it could rival the actual Switch controller in terms of sensitivity overall. I mean, I'm barely moving this controller here and it's holding things steady. In my opinion, the gyroscope on this is one of the best things about this controller. Now let's talk about the shoot mode, which I find extremely interesting, and if you like to play first-person shooters, you might like this option. If you flip the Switch over on the back to shoot, it will change the behavior of those back paddles. The back paddle on the right will slow down your aim with the joystick, so if it's not pressed, it's pretty quick, and then as soon as you press it, everything slows down considerably. This is a really great option if you like to snipe in game or if you need to be extremely precise. And the left back button will slow down your left side joystick, so you can go from a run to a walk with the press of a button without moving your thumb. So let's get into what I liked, what I didn't like, and whether or not I'd recommend the Brook Vivid controller. And we'll start out here with what I liked. First and foremost, I liked how this paired with the Switch. It was simple, it was straightforward, and the controller can wake up the Switch from a sleep state. That is actually pretty huge for third-party controllers. Not a lot of them offer that feature. On top of that, I like the shoot functionality on this. If you flip this over to shoot, it changes the behavior of those back paddles, and I really liked how they behaved. Slowing down the joysticks is a huge thing if you like to play first-person shooters, or possibly games that require precise motions from those joysticks. And the last thing I liked about this was the fact that the gyroscope was extremely responsive. This is one of the best gyroscopes I've ever used in a third-party controller. It worked very well and I was very impressed with it. Now getting into what I didn't like about this controller. I didn't like the phone clip on this one. It didn't do a great job at supporting the weight of my phone. My phone was very floppy in it. I also don't like the D-pad on this one. If you require precise movements of possibly left or right or up or down, yeah, it's absolutely fine. But if you're playing fighting games, this controller is a complete bust. I wouldn't recommend it at all for that. And on top of that, the triggers on this one are also pretty bad. And I'm trying to be polite about this, but they are horrible. I mean, they only work about 50% of the way. The first 50% is complete dead zone, and that's kind of unacceptable if you need to use the triggers. I would argue that the last two things I don't like about this controller are completely subjective. I don't like how this controller feels in my hands. I couldn't get a comfortable grip on it. I would argue that it's not a comfortable controller, but that may vary from person to person here in hand size and hand type. On top of that, I don't like the styling of this. To me, this looks a little cartoony. Some people might like it. I don't, and I really don't like that sunshine yellow color. I don't want to say it's ugly, but to me it's not pleasing on the eyes. Before I give my overall recommendation, let's take a look at the price and also factor that in. Right now the Brook Vivid is priced at $40 on Amazon, and that's for the blue controller, which I tested out, and also for the yellow version, I guess whichever version you want. That does include the controller, it does include the phone clip and a charging cable. The $40 price point puts this controller in a very interesting bracket. It slips under some heavy hitters like the 8BitDo Pro 2, which is $10 more expensive, and that doesn't include the phone clip. And it's way cheaper than some more expensive options like an actual Switch Pro controller. So at $40, would I recommend the Brook Vivid controller? And the answer here is yes and no. Know if you're looking for one controller to do it all. Know if you're looking for the best controller available out there. The triggers on this will let you down. The D-pad on this doesn't really register diagonal movements that well at all, and that is a big problem in a lot of games that use a D-pad. However, if you're looking for a controller that can wake up the Switch that's fairly inexpensive, then yes. On top of that, the shoot mode here is pretty darn cool. If you play a lot of first-person shooter games, then this controller might be up your alley. So despite this controller's flaws, it is fairly attractively priced and it does offer a ton of features. If you get this one on sale, then yeah, I would say probably go for it if you're looking for a secondary controller out there. But anyways, that is all I've got for you in this one. Straight to the point, all stuff and no fluff. Huge shout out to Brook for providing the Vivid for a fair and honest review. Let me know your thoughts about it in the comments below. If you like this video, leave a like. If you didn't like this video, leave a like. Hit that subscribe button, check out my other videos, don't tempt fate, save your state.